The OCD and Anxiety Podcast by Robert James Coaching. Hello and welcome to episode 344. I hope that wherever you are today, you're doing very well. But if you are struggling with OCD or anxiety, then you can get a free session with me. To get that, you can head over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com, and there you can book in for that free session directly, or if you prefer, you can send me a message and let me know about what you're struggling with. Now, in today's podcast, I speak with author and business thought leader Nick Jonsson. Nick is an expert in mental health, resilience, and the impact of loneliness in sports. He has a best-selling book called Executive Loneliness, and is a speaker and somebody who's very engaging and very passionate, as you'll hear in the podcast as we go through, about mental health and about really trying to help people to speak up more about mental health. And in this podcast, he shares lots of tips from his own experiences of dealing with alcohol and with anxiety. And it's a very kind of practical podcast. It's really him sharing a lot of the things that he's learnt from his own story with anxiety, with you today, to kind of help you to hopefully not make some of the same mistakes that he's made, but also he really brings a real sense of kind of kindness and compassion, to dealing with mental health issues and, to really kind of speaking up about it. And so, I think you're going to find it's a really interesting conversation. He's clearly somebody with a lot of experience in this area. So I very much hope that you enjoy. And if you'd like to check out his book, Executive Loneliness, you can find that on Amazon. And if you'd like to find out more about him, you can find him on LinkedIn under Nick Jonsson. So many thanks, guys. And I really hope that you enjoy. Please don't forget, if you would like to support the podcast, you can sign up for Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. And if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you can by searching for @RobertJamesCoaching UK. So many thanks, and off we go. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Rob.
It's great to have you on. You're all the way over there in Singapore, so it's fantastic with this technology to be able to have this conversation with you. So to start off with, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, sure. It'd be my pleasure. So I was born in Sweden, educated in Australia, and then I lived and worked the last 20 years in Southeast Asia. So I worked in various roles in general management, working my way up to managing director in international firms and so on. So that's a little bit about my background. These days I left the corporate world, and that's probably what we're going to dig into a little bit about today, Rob, as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so what kind of made you want to leave the corporate world? It sounds like you were doing quite well. You managed to climb that ladder, but obviously, something caused this change of path. What was it?
Well, if I should put one word to it, it's probably the anxiety. But if I have to go a little bit more into the details about it, what happened was that my career was doing really well, and I was still am a high achiever, and I jumped from promotion to promotion, working my way up until one day I was let go, and I was terminated from my job, and I was basically not looking at myself. I was blaming everyone else and really full of anger about being terminated from this job. And I struggled with explaining to anyone else why I was terminated, and the stories I was sharing that, that I was making a career move to something else. Once I eventually got a new job, all of this was forgotten about until 5 years later, when I was let go from that company again. And that time it was a merger and acquisition. So having had then 2 times being let go from a company unexpected was a big blow to my ego, but it really also filled me with anxiety.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes sense. And so what did you do then? And what did you do to try to manage that anxiety and that stress in these situations? Because I imagine, this is something that many people go through, but it's really hard, no?
Yes, and the issue was that I didn't seek help. I didn't seek any professional help. There was no one I spoke with about this. My way of dealing with it was perhaps a typical man trying to sort it out myself. And I thought I put myself in this situation, I have to solve it myself. But the second time when it happened, it was really too hard for me to deal with. So I was then married and I pushed my ex-wife away and asked her to basically move back to Sweden with our son, who was 5 years of age. Again, out of fear and anxiety about not being able to care for them. What about housing? What about school for our son and so on? So it was my defense mechanism kicking in full gear, thinking that I should be here myself. I should deal with this myself and land a new job. So then I found myself completely isolated. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that isolation, that loneliness, I imagine it probably just exacerbates the situation with the anxiety. No, it's probably actually the last thing that you needed.
Yes, absolutely. And I managed to get a new job and a very good job, a bigger job, perhaps too big for me at that stage. I was not in my best shape and I had a lot of worries. So coming into this new job, then I remember I felt like I was walking on eggshells the first 3 months on probation, always worried, will they pull the plug? Will I pass the probation and so on? And yeah, I was just terrified. Once I passed the probation, I still was full of fear until about a year into the job, where I thought it's better that I terminate myself and resign from this job than having a third time being terminated for a job. And that again was something that I didn't discuss with anybody. I didn't talk to a coach. I didn't even go into my boss, who was my good friend, and we had a great relationship. We were hanging out together, talking and having good times together. But I didn't even raise it to her. I didn't say I have concerns about some part of the job which I'm worried about.
Mm.
And when I resigned, it was a shock to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, that's obviously a really concerning place to be, that you're in a good job, you've got a good boss, probably financially doing really well and things are going well, but you feel this pressure. What if the same thing happens again? Surely it's better if I take it into my own hands and just walk away from this job. Okay, so I imagine after that you probably felt pretty lost. No?
I was lost. I didn't know what was home and anything at all. So here I was, have kicked away my family, resigned from my job, and yeah, I jumped from contract to contract, trying to land something, being a bit delusional about things, and this led me to a personal crisis and a crash. Until then, I was managing my diet and exercise really well. I lost all of those habits and exchanged, my working routine for the bar after work, or after whatever contract I was working on, spending too much time in the bar and then changing a healthy diet to fast food and pizza. So I gained a lot of weight, putting on about 30 kilos. And it was a slippery slope. I didn't realize it myself. But 2, 3 years later, I had even an alcohol addiction problem. And that was when basically I hit my own rock bottom.
Wow. Okay. So this is where it leads to. If it's not dealt with, you don't get the right support, perhaps, and you start using unhelpful coping mechanisms, alcohol and unhealthy food. Okay. And so before that, though, you did have healthy habits, that were supporting you, like exercise and things. Okay. And so once you reach that point of kind of rock bottom, your personal rock bottom, did you then seek support? What was the next steps after that?
I was at that stage covering for it to my best ability, and again jumping from job to job. And I had met a new woman who I'm today happily married with, and it was only when I had so much pain internally that I couldn't hold it anymore. I then remember sitting her down on the sofa basically and explaining to her how I felt internally, and that was the first time I explained that to another human being. And she listened with empathy, and it was almost like something was lifted from me from that moment when I just explained it how I felt. uh, I have had fortunately a V-shaped recovery, and it's 5.5 years because she's listening and offering support. That was all I needed to hear. Of course it was a very difficult journey back, but that was the big step forward that made all the difference.
Absolutely, yeah. That's amazing that you had somebody in your life, no, that was willing to just sit down and to just listen and to demonstrate that empathy. Okay, and so from that moment on, things really began to change. What was
Well,
the first big change, you think?
yeah, well, I was exposed, right? And it is uncomfortable at that moment. But what happened then was that she dragged me to a doctor pretty much right away. And while I was shy to share again what have happened, she shared what I have told her. And the doctor gave medication and so on, because I needed medication for stress, anxiety, sleeping pills, and all kind of things, because I was in a terrible shape. And then also she also brought me to a friend who have had some problems before with alcohol, and this person listened also and shared phone numbers, linked me up with other people in the community. So within 24 hours basically I was exposed multiple times, and I was being the most vulnerable I ever been in my life. But what opened up then was a new life that I never seen before, a
Mm,
life when you are more honest and you take an honest, deep look at yourself and you're
mm,
sharing what's going on.
mm.
And therefore, I had a good path back.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. So actually, you were able to, through that open space that you kind of entered, where, like you just said, you were able to bring more honesty. You were able to be a bit more vulnerable, and to share things with people that, for a long time, and I can relate to this as well, because it took me years to really kind of speak to people about my own struggles with OCD and anxiety. Um, yeah, for a long time, I think men, we're just terrible at opening up. And so, yeah, it's fantastic that you were able to turn that around and actually, you know, um, seek out that support. Granted, you had somebody to kind of help you with that, and that's fantastic. But obviously, it also took you to kind of take that initial first step, no, and to kind of really put yourself out there and say, okay, maybe I do need some support with this, and actually, it sounds like straight away, you recognize, well, I don't have to stay stuck. I don't have to keep doing things in the same old way. I do actually have options here. So after all of this happened in such a short time, 24 hours of, becoming more vulnerable, but seeing a new path, a new life opening up. What happened then?
Well, then I was told by everyone, to keep going. And I think the world of recovery is a beautiful space full of volunteers who are very passionate about giving back. I think for anyone who's been at their rock bottom and managed to patch their life together, are quite, passionate about giving back. And if anyone who's listening is wondering, what is it with that recovery world? Well, it is many of times we talk about the 12-step program, and the 12-step is always giving it back, and you're stuck there, right? So it's a circle. It just goes back and people are giving back. So it was just a great place to be, and it also made me feel normal. I was no longer feeling that I'm the only one who gone through these issues and challenges. leaders. Here were successful people who gone through similar things 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or a year or 10 years, and that really made all the difference. So I just kept coming back, and I kept getting the support. Until about a year into my recovery, I was feeling absolutely wonderful. And then something happened that would change my life forever again. I lost a good friend of mine in Singapore, a guy from the UK who sadly left us by suicide, and that just really shook me up again.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's awful. Okay. And how did that impact you then personally? But I mean, obviously, it's a really hard thing to go through for anybody. But yeah, what was the impact of that on you?
Yeah, so until that moment, I have lived in my little safe bubble, basically with doctor, my wife, the recovery group, who I shared basically what had happened to me. But on the external world, no one really knew. People could see that I lost weight, I was back in health, and I was looking much better and happier. But I was not ready to share with the world what had happened. But being in the shock, basically, of what happened with my friend, I immediately I wanted to start helping, and I called his brother and I asked if I could talk about this and trying to raise money or funds or awareness about suicide prevention. And his immediate answer was yes, shout it out loud. And basically I took that as my call to action. So I started a fund and a campaign basically to raise awareness about this. And I made a video then that I posted on LinkedIn, and it went viral. So in 24 hours, radio stations, TV, and everyone wanted to interview me. They said, this is a topic we want to talk about, but there's no one who dare or normally want to step forward and talk about it. So I was ready in my shock state. And, once you share your story on radio and TV, there's little turning back. So here I was for a second time completely exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even more so this time, though, because it wasn't just a small circle of people that you were opening up to. Like you say, you were telling your story on the news, and anybody could tune into that. Okay, but it's it's turning something that was obviously a tragedy, and seeing, okay, well, what can I do about this? How can I try to help in this really sad situation? And actually, it sounds like that's what you were able to do there by taking that action. And so this has led you then down the path of kind of helping people who are struggling with with suicidal thoughts perhaps, or with anxiety or depression. Or can you tell me more about kind of what's happened since?
Yeah, so that opened up the whole world on not only recovery, but all of the people going through that. And there was people writing to me from all over the world, thanking me for breaking the stigma and normalizing the conversation around this. There was people who have lost family members, or a wife who lost a husband recently, and it's just so much stigma that people just are not ready to talk about it. And for every single interview I gave, then I got more and more confidence and more willingness to talk about it, to the point where I had compiled so much news clippings from talking about this that people started to say, you should write a book about this. And first, I thought it sounded ridiculous. But then as I went through it and I approached a publisher in Australia who said, yeah, we've been looking for someone who's willing to write on this. So it was just a good match again. And that obviously made me double down on it again. They had requirements in terms of surveys and research and so on. And I had to interview a lot of executives to find out about feelings and so on. And that was really the next step of the journey. And I spent 2 years basically researching the topic and writing the book.
Okay. So within your particular industry, there's a lot of men then who are silently struggling, do you think, with mental health issues?
Absolutely, and yes, I mean, having been then an expat in Southeast Asia for 20 years, many of the expat would be the senior leaders of the international firms representing an American or European company based then perhaps in Singapore, running as a regional office. And that many times means that they're responsible for 20 countries, traveling a lot of working hours, working in multiple time zones, and a lot of pressure to handle that. But it also creeps in a lot of loneliness. So those were the people I interviewed, and out of them, about 33% were suffering from loneliness during the time I wrote the book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is a real crisis. I mean, obviously, mental health issues can affect both men and women, but there is, I think, male suicide is something that is a real problem that often isn't really talked about all that much. It's really great that you were able to bring more awareness to it. So if people are listening who are struggling with loneliness, maybe they are an executive, or they're finding it hard to kind of manage their mental health, what kind of tips do you have for them?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Rob, because as I started to give some talks then when my book came out and so on, and as I was writing it, people said, it was great for you, Nick, that you came into a recovery program, but what about us? If I don't have an alcohol problem, how should I get help? And that is exactly what was included in the book. I actually wrote 5 steps for anyone, with the 5 steps that I would say would help anyone to get out of it, may it be isolation, loneliness, or stress in the workplace. And I'd be happy, Rob, to briefly talk you through those 5 steps.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Helping the listeners.
Yeah.
So the first step then, and this is what happens in the 12-step program, everyone will take stock. And if you look at yourself, deeply inside, and you can write it down on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, and do this with a sponsor, a mentor, or a coach, and just to take a really honest inventory check of yourself. I mean, we do this if we are a shop owner, we will take stock and do an audit, but how often as human beings do we take an honest stock take of ourselves?
Yeah, really not enough at all. So yeah, that's important to do that, no?
Yeah, and so as soon as we are capable of doing that, and what it meant for me, and what I recommend, is going back all the way to your childhood and writing down anything you might have said to upset perhaps your sister or a classmate you had, perhaps some things you carry around still with you, some pain. And at this stage, it's just to write it down. We don't deal with it. It's just getting it down on paper. And I was encouraged even to bring out, school photos from my high school, university photos, and think through looking at every single person and thinking, did I say something to them? And think through your family, all the family members, your close relatives, and think, do you have something unsaid? There's many of us perhaps who've broken their relationship, who didn't speak to a sister for a few years, so there was something left. And that all has to go on that sheet.
Okay. And what's the next step?
The next step is on the next row to just write down at this stage who to ask for help for this. So in my case, for example, I was overweight. I started to drink alcohol too much, and there was many issues. So on that next row, you just start to write down, what would be the people you can ask for help here. Is it a coach, a mentor? What can you do about it, basically? And so that's the second step.
Okay. And what would be your third step after that?
Dealing with getting healthy first. And what I mean here is specifically the physical health, because if you have gone down the path of mentally being broken many times, you brought with you also the physical health. And what really worked for me and the people I've seen is getting back into fitness. In my case, it was getting help from someone who wrote a fitness plan for me, where some wearable devices, we can track it, just so you have a coach, someone who can follow up with you, and getting back in a physical shape. And I call it in my book a natural happy pill, because as I mentioned before, I was getting medication and I really want to stop all medication. And my fitness coach then set me a plan, and we basically started to increase the exercise, and I was able to taper off the medication, and I haven't touched any medication for 5 years now because of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I really agree with with fitness and exercise being incredibly helpful. It's an obvious one, but so many of us, don't necessarily do it still. And, if you can consistently, exercise, no matter what state you might be in. Obviously, if you haven't exercised for a long time, you should do so carefully and maybe speak with a doctor first. But we know that exercise, it's proven through many studies, to be incredibly helpful for anxiety, for depression. I feel it myself. I know we were talking at the start, about we're both into cycling, and if I go for a bike ride, I feel, within 10-15 minutes, some of that stress is just relieving, and I'm, getting those endorphins flowing, and my blood is flowing, and it's, maybe I take on a small downhill section, and if I'm doing some downhill mountain biking, well, I'm sorry, but I can't be thinking about all the work I've got to do, or that argument I've had, or whatever it is. I've got to be in the moment. Otherwise, I'm going to crash my bike into a tree. And I really don't want to do that. So yeah, it's, outdoor sports, even if it's just exercise like running or something, but yeah, for me, if you can add in kind of a fun outdoor sport of some sort, can really help just to focus the mind and, to make you forget about certain difficult things. So yeah, I think we're really on the same page there with that one.
Yeah, and then the step 4, which is a very tough one, perhaps the toughest one for everyone here. It is about nurturing healthy relationships. And what I mean with that is making amends. And it's going back to that list where you wrote down the people you had harmed, the people you had said perhaps not so nice things to. It's about going back to one by one. And first you do this with a coach or a mentor or a sponsor, where you just discuss what actions should you take for every single one. And you take an action of going back and making amends to them unless you would harm them. You don't want to go back to an ex-girlfriend who's remarried, or ex-wife who's remarried 30 years later, and start harming them or breaking the relationship. That's not the point. It's about you having closure on things. It might be that you write an apology and an amend letter, and maybe you pray on it, but then you burn the letter. You have had a ceremony, you had some closure. You can do that perhaps if there was someone who you lost also, who left this earth, and you can write a letter to them also, just to try to make some kind of closure. And what happened here in my case was that I had something unsaid with my sister. It was an incident a couple of years earlier where she gave a Coca-Cola to my son, who was about 4 or 5 years of age, and he didn't drink Coke, and I didn't want him to have one. Damage was done, but I was really fired up. I stormed off the table, I grabbed my son and walked away. And I remember my sister tried to call after, sending messages saying she was sorry, but I just didn't want to talk to her at all. And I couldn't deal with that. And then we had basically a broken relationship. Well, we saw each other at family gatherings, but we didn't really speak. I didn't reach out more than on her birthday, just out of formality. And that was something that was painful. I walked around with that inside me, that pain. And then on this step, I had to make an amend, and the best to do it is in person. So when I had a chance, I asked her if we could go for a lunch one day. She said yes. And at the lunch, I said, I'm sorry about the incident a few years ago. It was really silly of me. And then I explained also what was happening with me at that time. And I said, I'm on a different path now. I'm working on becoming a better person, and I'm really sorry. And then asking her if there's anything I can do to make things right. So that's just one example. I have, over the last 5.5 years, probably done around 100 of those amends. And it's an amazing feeling for everyone you do.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really great advice to try to do those things. And so often when those kinds of situations are just going on, and maybe there's several of them, with important people in your life, it creates this kind of quiet background anxiety where there's something that needs to be addressed, but we're not doing it for whatever reason. We're holding on to that grudge, or whatever it is. And we in a way, we need to focus on humility and recognizing that, okay, as much as anything, going and having this conversation, it is in the long run going to benefit me. It's not just going to benefit that person. It's not just kind of giving in and saying, well, but it is actually going to help you as well by having that conversation. It's going to be difficult, but in the long run, it's going to lead to much more inner peace and being able to let go, of those long held resentments, which ultimately, unfortunately, they tend to lead to that background anxiety. So little by little, when you deal with those things, and you stop avoiding them, a big part of OCD and anxiety really is avoidance of uncomfortable emotions and difficult things that we don't want to experience. And really not having those conversations with people, it's that in a nutshell. That's kind of part of that process. We're avoiding a difficult thing, and it may be that isn't our particular obsession. Maybe our particular obsession is about hand washing, or maybe it's about all sorts of different themes that we have in OCD. But actually just going and doing something difficult and having a conversation with somebody that you actually do care about, you do love deep down, but you've fallen out with, well, that's a difficult thing and that's an awkward thing. But actually it leads to, you learning how to have a bit more humility, to accept a bit more your anxiety, and to expose yourself to something difficult. So yeah, I can really see, that would be a really beneficial thing to focus on.
Yeah, and it's all about cleaning up your side of the street. When you make an amend, you just focus on what you've done. The issue is that we tend to be so self. Should I say that we defend ourselves rather than focusing on ourselves? We focus on what they have done wrong, but that's not what we do here. We just come back and clean our side of the street, and it's up to them if they also have an amend and apology. And sometimes also they might not accept the amend and the apology, and that's fine. We cleaned our side of the street, and we are free to move forward. And what I do these days in my life, I end every day with this. I think through before I go to bed. I think through, did I send an email today? Did I send a message? Did I say something to someone that wasn't quite right? Do I have some feeling inside me that it's not right? Then you have a chance before you go to bed to send away a message or a voice note or whatever it may be, to just clear that amend up so you can go and have a good night's sleep without worrying about that. So that's something that I try to do every day now. And even better, you should ideally catch yourself right away if you say something and take it back and make the amend on the spot. That's where we optimally will be looking for.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really great idea, great way to kind of go about things, no? And like you say, when you put your head on the pillow, you can kind of feel calm and happy that you've been doing the best you can to have those good relationships. So yeah, that's great advice, I think. Okay. Did you say it was there's another step still? No?
Yes, we're coming to the last step then. Many times that you hear books that this is perhaps the first step, and it's about finding your purpose. But what I found, and this is not only for me, but working with others now, is that if you are not well physically, if you have a lot of anxiety because your relationships are damaged and so on, it's really hard to go deep inside yourself to find out what is it that is your purpose. So I have that as the last step, and that is really about being ready to deflate your ego and see what are you really here for. And it's not about us, it's about what can we do for other people, according to me.
Okay, fantastic. So figuring out your why and your values, and and maybe trying to set out your stall on how can I support other people in doing well, and not just focusing on getting rid of my anxiety, for example. No?
Yeah, exactly. So once we've done that cleanup, we are ready to really go a little bit deeper here. And it's about giving back the gift then, because there's so many people out there who are struggling with this. So what I do now on a daily basis, I'm working with people who are going through difficult times. And it doesn't have to be people who go through alcohol issues, but also with anxiety and people losing jobs and so on. And I'm these days the first one to raise my hand. When I hear that someone has been laid off, I reach out deliberately, and I ask my colleagues also to reach out just to check in with the person and see, if we can be of service or help at all. Many times they might just need someone to listen.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's really interesting work that you're doing there. Okay, and so from your experiences, what would you say is kind of, if you only had one piece of advice for people who might be really struggling with stress, anxiety, what would your advice be?
Well, it will be to write it down. And that's what I do. Everywhere around my desk is full of Post-it notes. And whenever something comes up, I write it down. And then it's about thinking, is there someone I can call about this right now? Otherwise, leave the note there and perhaps sleep on it. And then the next day I deal with it. So that's my system. That's how I work these days. I never let things lie around more than 24 hours. Then my desk would be full of all these notes. But just think about it and use, asking for help as your greatest strength. That's my advice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess for you, everything changed that day, no, when you actually opened up for the first time. I think that's something really important for the listeners, hopefully, to kind of take on board, because I think so many of us, and myself included, I was the same for many years. And it's such a shame, because both of us could have done that much earlier, and it probably would have saved ourselves a lot of unnecessary suffering in the process.
Yes, absolutely. But sometimes we have to get sadly, we have to get pained and we have to be beaten in order to really learn the lesson. We are, even as adults, we are like children in that sense. We have to put the hand on the stove ourselves, sadly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, there is some truth to that. Okay, fantastic. Nick, if people want to find out more about you, your book, do you want to tell us about your book?
Yeah, sure. So they can go to Amazon and look up Executive Loneliness. It's there as a Kindle and normal book, and also as audiobook by Audible. So that would be one way of finding me. Otherwise, they can go on LinkedIn, and it's Nick Jonsson, NickJonsson.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really great talking to you.
Likewise, Rob. Hope to see you for a bike ride in Spain sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah. Come over to Barcelona. We'll jump on the mountain bike. I have an electric one these days, so cheating a little bit, but I don't have so much time as I used to, as we have a little baby.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much, Rob, and thanks to the listeners.
Thank you. Please remember that any information you listen to on the podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for actual medical or mental health advice from a doctor, psychologist, or any other medical or mental health professional.